I'm Maxine Kirshenbaum, and I'm a PhD student in physical chemistry at the University of Toronto. My field of research is nanomaterials, and the type of nanomaterials that I study are known as nanocrystals, which are basically really tiny rocks. So, as an example, the system that I study is known as lead sulfide, and I can go to a museum's geology exhibit where I'll find big rocks of lead sulfide called galena. Now, the ones that I study are less than 10 nanometers in size, which is 1,000,000 times smaller than an ant or a range rock. When we get down to this size, the properties differ greatly from their bigger counterparts, and with that comes novel chemistry and physics for us to explore. The types of nanocrystals that I study absorb and release light, and the color of light that they absorb and release depends on their size. These species are known as quantum dots. And for an extreme example, I could have a small quantum dot that absorbs and releases blue light, and I could have a big quantum dot that absorbs and releases red light. My research is trying to understand the processes that underlie the formation of quantum dots from molecules. And so in a sense, what I study is the evolution of quantum dots, which is quite fascinating because we start with a set of molecules which somehow form into a nanoscopic sized rock that's composed of tens to thousands of atoms arranged in a well-ordered and characteristic manner. And with this formation process, we start with that molecular soup, and then what will form are small quantum dots, which will grow, and they'll grow until they reach a size that they're happy with. And because these species interact or absorb and release light in a way that is size dependent, I can use the color of light that the system is absorbing or releasing at a given time to track this formation process. Like biological systems, the traits that a quantum dot possesses is strongly dictated by the environment that it grows up within. And as a researcher, what I can do is intentionally manipulate that environment. So I can do so physically by changing the temperature, but I can also do so chemically by changing the sets of molecules that these quantum dots form in the presence of. So something that I do routinely is change that chemical environment by introducing different types of molecules, different identities, at different stages of the formation process, and then I check to see how that affects the timeline of formation, as well as the traits that the quantum dots eventually end up with. And doing so allows me to construct a picture of the interactions that underlie the formation of quantum dots with specific traits. And by better understanding this, we can improve our reproducibility, as well as the quality of the quantum dots that we're forming, which is really important for driving forward fundamental research, as well as for bringing forward applications that are relevant for society. So I haven't always studied quantum dots and nanomaterials in general. I first studied them for my honors working with Professor Mita Dasog at Dalhousie University. But in between my honors and PhD, I did a master's, still with Mita, but I didn't work with nanomaterials, and instead worked with different types of systems looking at electrochemical fuel production. And then before all of that, I worked in a carbohydrate synthesis lab working under the supervision of Professor Bruce Grinley. And I think this diverse research background has actually aided me as a scientist because it's allowed me to better bridge connections between different areas of chemistry, which just allows me to better contextualize the species and the interactions that I end up studying. My ability to have gone to this stage of my scientific journey rests upon the support that I've gotten from my friends and my family, as well as all the advice and support that I've received from my supervisors. My first supervisor, Professor Grinley, gave me the first shred of confidence and belief that I could actually pursue research, and I'm not sure that I would have done so without him. I really struggled early on in my academic and scientific experience. I did so bad in my first year of university that I almost got kicked out. Clearly, I was able to turn around my academics with a lot of hard work, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't still struggling the whole time. It took me a long time to understand what my experiences were in these spaces. I am a neurodivergent individual. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was about 9, but up until a few years ago, I thought that diagnosis just meant that I had issues with focusing, which really didn't capture what I was experiencing and struggling with. And so that affected my ability to seek out support structures, and such as academic accommodations that would have been extremely helpful for my academic journey. And instead, I tended to try and hide my different functionalities because I thought that I just had to learn how to work. Tools like therapy have been so important for allowing me to develop as a person and as a scientist. Therapy has allowed me to recognize and embrace that my different functionality is what underlies some of my strengths as a researcher, and has allowed me to develop the tools to actually work with myself in a sustainable and effective manner. Something that I think is important to highlight about neurodivergence is that because it's a statement on different types of brain functionality, it's also a statement on different types of physical functionality. One area that my neurodivergence has affected me my whole life is my communication. I struggle with the physical act of communicating. I have a speech impediment, and when I was younger, I worked a lot with speech pathologists. These days, I still struggle with articulation and enunciation. I have to just hope that those days don't happen on a day where I have to present at a conference. The other thing that I struggle with is the actual externalization of thoughts in my head. This is because I see the world panoramically, and so when I go to let out thoughts, sometimes the amount of information that comes out is a panoramic amount, which is like a tidal wave to anyone who listens. I have to thank my current supervisor, Professor Mark Wilson, and my former supervisor, Professor Mita Dasog, who are extremely dedicated to science communication, and the strategies that I've learned from them have been so important for me developing as a scientist who can actually articulate my scientific ideologies, as well as advocate for myself in scientific spaces. And so something that I think needs to be more concretely integrated into both scientific and academic spaces is actual structures that are in place to ensure that young and early scientists receive rounded support so that they can become strong scientists with many sets of skills, including communication, but as well as knowing how to work with themselves in a way that's sustainable and healthy for them. And I think something that's coupled to this pretty strongly is hearing the stories of, say, my peers and the areas that they've been helped and hindered, and my peers hearing the same from me, and us being able to better support each other as a result. And I think the same would be true for a broader community. Us hearing how each other's hardships have shaped us into the scientists that we are means that we can have a better understanding of what our community needs as a whole.